Now, the United Kingdom Independence Party has always taken a very dim view of Britain's membership of the EU. However, recent polling suggests that what really exercises UKIP voters is not Europe, but the thorny issue of immigration. UKIP has seen a surge in support recently, and its leader Nigel Farage has been marketing his party as if it were, in the words of one commentator, a Thatcher-era tribute band. Let's see if he takes that as a compliment. Good morning.
Good morning.
Is it a compliment or not?
Well, one thing for certain, whether you agree with Thatcher or not, at least that was a period of time when we had politics of conviction. Ideas and general elections really mattered. And now what do we have? We have leaders of the so-called main parties, none of whom have ever had a job, lived in the real world, and it's very difficult on the really big issues to tell them apart. So I'll take it more as a compliment than an insult.
We haven't had the Cameron speech on the EU yet, which is much trailed, but we're told there's going to be an in-out vote on Europe, and if there is, that's your job done, isn't it?
Well, I think the first thing to say is, that 10 years ago, you couldn't even discuss the question of leaving the European Union in polite society. I mean, it was considered completely beyond the pale to even talk about it. So the very fact that a British Prime Minister is making a speech on this issue is actually a tribute to the thousands of people that have worked and helped get UKIP established as a political party.
Sure, but job done then, for you lot?
No, job done is when, firstly, we become an independent, self-governing nation, and secondly, when we start to put into practice the things the British economy needs and the British people need for us to be a proper 21st century country engaged with the world and not just with Europe.
Are we clear on what in-out means? Because you've always said you can ask that question, but actually others say, well, it's far too simplistic to put it that way.
Well, I mean, really, the question is simpler than that. The question is, do you wish to govern your own country through the ballot box in a democracy or become a province of a new United States of Europe? That, in reality, is what it's all about. And what we've had over the last week...
Well, that's a rather loaded take on it, isn't it?
No, it isn't.
That's asking for the answer, let's say, as the UK and out of... I mean, that's exactly what people fear.
At the heart of this is the whole democratic argument. Do we want to govern ourselves, or are we prepared to accept that nearly all of our law comes from somewhere else, over which we only have a tiny say?
If we leave, we lose the trade, people say. We lose the numbers. OK, now, the numbers go on forever in this debate, but it's clear we do an absolutely huge amount of trade with the EU, and we do less.
Yeah, I mean, look, the EU is an important marketplace. Something like 40% of our overseas trade goes to European Union countries. That is true. That figure, by the way, declines every year as the EU itself becomes a smaller part of the global economy. But we want to go on doing business with the EU, and we will go on doing business with the EU.
But they might not want it on the same terms.
Do you know,
they definitely won't.
The last year, for which we have full trade figures, show that the EU sold us nearly £46 billion worth of goods more than we sold them. There is no prospect of Mercedes and Volkswagen not wishing to sell their cars in this country because we're not part of a political union.
What about the criticism that as soon as you say we're having the big referendum, the in-out referendum, you leave the question hanging in the air, creates uncertainty, people don't invest, you already get into a slippery slope?
Well, there's uncertainty staying in the EU. I mean, goodness knows what new legislation they're going to come up with over financial services, over the environment, which is already damaging British manufacturing. So the world's uncertain whatever you do. But even if we did accept that argument, that really means that what Mr. Cameron ought to do is to say, right, we're going to have a full, free and fair referendum on this before the next general election. Because what this speech apparently is going to offer us is the idea that if he wins the next general election, which looks doubtful, after a renegotiation, which I don't believe to be possible because the other member states of Europe aren't in the mood, then in 5 years' time, he'll give us a referendum. And the trouble is, we've heard this all before from Mr. Cameron, and frankly, I don't trust him.
Well, what about a possible alliance with the Conservatives? Now, I thought you were going to laugh when I said that.
Well,
they're going to the next election, and let's say the whole Lib Dem coalition thing falls apart, but they're the biggest party still, and they turn to you. What do you say?
I think with David Cameron as leader, that is virtually impossible to even contemplate. It's very interesting. Ed Miliband, Nick Clegg, they don't agree with what UKIP stands for, but they recognise that we have a sensible point of view that is held by a large number of people in this country. Mr. Cameron, whenever he's asked about UKIP, just throws abuse at us and calls us nutters and closet racists. And so I don't think there's any prospect of us doing a deal with the Conservative Party with Mr Cameron in charge.
OK, on a national level, no, but local deals, maybe moving aside when you like the cut of a particular Conservative candidate?
It may happen, but it's not my priority. My priority is not to take UKIP backwards, it's to take UKIP forwards. And as your introduction said, people support us not just because of where we stand on Europe, but where we stand on open door immigration, where we stand on wind farms springing up all over this country, where we stand on attitudes towards small business. There are lots of reasons why people go out and vote UKIP, and my job is to push this party forwards, not drag it back.
Nigel Farage, thank you for joining us.